All right, welcome back from the bench. We are going to continue this conversation. We've all been talking with a lot of you that have been watching. We definitely appreciate you guys spending some time with us. A question that I've been asked, and now I'm going to toss it around the horn, is what struggles have you had early in your career?
Struggles early in the career are, for me, there were a few of them. I think one of the first ones was patience. I wanted everything to go the way it was supposed to go right away. So immediately you want to win, you want to show everything you want to do everything that you can. And so patience was one of them. And honestly, I would say, when you're young, I think a little bit of arrogance. Like I just thought that, I knew everything, and it's like you're 23 years old, you know nothing. And if you look back on yourself a little bit, you'd say, well, maybe you should listen a little bit more than you speak, and maybe you'll learn a little bit more. For that, I have to say I'm super grateful for the people that I worked with, Bill Nepville and Mary Heil Nepville, because they were very patient with me, and they really helped me kind of understand and learn the business by doing. They let me do a lot of things. So struggles early, again, just under the arrogance of not understanding that you don't know everything, and also some patience. But I think the thing that I learned the most early on was to say no. When I starting out, I was 23 years old. I had one player that was older than me, but most of the players were my age or a little younger, and they're going to ask you to do everything in the world, and they did. They asked me everything, and learning to say no, and to hold your ground and be, in that role of now you're kind of supervisory to them as opposed to their best friend. Learning to say no and holding your ground and understanding when it's appropriate to say no. Those to me were the big three challenges that I had out of the gates. And I try to share that with people, when I move forward, that as a young coach, the first thing that you need to be comfortable saying is no, not to your boss, but to the players.
Yeah, for me, growing up in Hawaii, getting my start at the University of Hawaii as a manager, then GA, then I got my opportunity to coach there. The one thing that I struggled with was the mentoring other than my boss and the networking that I kind of had to take upon myself to do, mainly because my boss, my mentor at the time, Vince Gu, was on his way out. He was hanging on, I believe, for me, to be honest with you, it went from I'm going to do this for one more year, then it went to 2 years. And I'm so thankful for that because it allowed me to continue my coaching career at that next school. But that was a struggle for me. Vince never traveled to the Final Four. He rarely went recruiting, so I couldn't connect with his circle of friends. So that was a little hard, going to the Final Fours, not knowing anybody. And I'm a personal person, so in time, it all played out and worked out. But that was something that I was antsy to get going and networking and getting to know this and getting to know this person. So that was the biggest struggle. And, that comes with being on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But other than that, I kind of echo Tony's patience and, thinking I knew everything. You get a little humble pie early on in your career, and you realize that you got to open your ears a lot more than your mouth, especially in those coaches meetings when you think you've solved something or the light bulb goes off and it's like, yeah, no, been there, done that. You didn't, recreate anything. But that's all I got.
Both so segue great to getting started as a young coach. I was at my alma mater, similar to Gav, and had an opportunity to be the assistant right after I graduated, and at the NEIA, where we were all double headers. So there was people that are on the women's team that literally they were in the other van going to the game, and so that was relational there. Had an opportunity to become the assistant coach, and then a year later the head coach decides that he's going to retire, and so now I'm the head coach. So my early struggle is all of a sudden going, wait a minute, how do I need a little bit of patience? I also need a little bit of arrogance. I definitely need to know how to say no, because these people, we were all hanging out having, a burger 2 years ago. And then at the same token, trying to figure out who my mentors are, because now I'm in this position that, was a lot of smoke and mirrors, frankly, just really just trying to be a sponge and do it right. And, really what it did is it afforded me to start connecting with other people outside of my little world, having grown up in such a small school, small environment as an athlete. So having that journey, that struggle, and the way it was at our program was, not only am I, coaching and trying to lead and write a practice plan and all those kind of things. And so just taught me that struggle where I had to figure out how to, get noticed, but still figure out how to run a practice and all these things. And so a lot of that was interesting. And I think it's afforded me that opportunity. And we learned a lot from our conversation with Yvonne last week about asking questions. And I think that was the thing that, really moved the needle for me in that early struggle, was the ability to try and go from there. As we think, Brian, what do you talk about when you think about some of those, and maybe also talk about some of the things that, if you were to, learn from those, that maybe you were like, I whiffed on that, and you would change or move forward and do it a little bit differently, maybe.
Yeah, my first spot was only a year. At McNeese, Bridget Martin retired after that class, and I had a decision to make. And I went to Cumberland College, which was NAIA. I think the biggest struggle I had, the first big struggle, was comparing myself to others. As I meet certain assistant coaches that obviously kind of like identified with me, the West Coast, WCC, things like that. Because I was working all those camps. I was working USD camp, Louisiana Tech camp, UConn camp, and I was kind of doing that for like 4 years. For me, it was just the comparison. Everyone was on a different ladder, and I had to kind of learn, just trust the ladder you're on, and hopefully, it's the right ladder, first of all. But I think that's the first thing. And I don't know if I would, it's not that I would redo anything, because I did something wrong. What I think I would have done more of is network. I felt like I didn't know. I mean, I was taking everything in. I was a consumer, like going to the Final Four. And back then the Final Four was different, right? Like the first clinic was at 7:30, and everyone's out drinking, networking, right? Like everyone's like falling asleep around like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I was up at 7 ready to go. And I was just on the court the whole time. And I was just a consumer, but I wasn't really doing the networking piece, like in between clinics, because I felt like it was a distraction. But I think I would just do that differently, because I felt like I was in comparison mode too much, and I think if I got to know more people, then it would have shifted my mindset a little different in terms of just, okay, you're on the right track, keep doing what you're doing, you're meeting the right people, things like that. So I think that's the one shift I think I would have done.
Let me throw this out to you guys, and Tony, I'll have you start. I had somebody who's a head coach currently who watched our show, and we were talking a little bit about Yvonne's story, and she was watching her story. And she had an interesting take. She said 85% of the young coaches, and it'd be fun to maybe ask our guests this too, but 85% of the young coaches that she talks to and ask her about how to get into the business, and her first question is, well, are you willing to travel? And when we think about all our stories, the four of us, like, Gav's in Hawaii, Brian, you're on at USD, Tony, you're started out at Tennessee, and look at our path. Tony, talk a little bit about that, because she said, as soon as I tell them, hey, are you willing to start out and go anywhere in the country for a job? And they say, well, no, I want to be X, Y, Z. And she goes, all right, well, so I'm throwing that to the group, and I'd love to hear just kind of maybe mentality on that. If you think that's oversold, undersold, that it just, is, and then, like I said, maybe that'd be fun to ask our guest as well when she's on.
I think when you look at this profession, it's highly competitive. I think it's highly competitive to get into. I mean, once you kind of get into it, then it's up to you to kind of keep yourself in it and keep yourself relevant and working hard and doing all the things that you need to do. But I think you can't really limit yourself to, where you go. I know for me, it wasn't. It wasn't. I knew when I left Tennessee, I wanted to go to graduate school, and the school that I wanted to go to was the University of San Francisco, and their third assistant position was not full time. It was a graduate assistant position. So I definitely wanted that job, and I wanted to go to California, and I wanted to coach in the WCC, and I wanted to learn from a respected program, as well as get my master's degree. So, I was willing to go from New York to Tennessee all the way across the country to San Francisco. And, I think that was a great decision for me because it's kind of springboarded my career from there. But it is interesting. Like, there's opportunities that come up in different places, and sometimes you might not see yourself in that specific place, but sometimes the opportunity is too good to pass up. And I went from San Francisco to Flagstaff, Arizona, and then Flagstaff, Arizona to Los Angeles at UCLA, and then from UCLA to Baton Rouge, Louisiana to LSU, and then LSU back up to the University at Albany, where I'm kind of from. So I think the journey that you take is what you're willing to, what kind of challenge you see in front of you. And, if you want to limit yourself by where you live, then you're certainly limiting options. But the experience you can gain from coaching in different leagues, learning different people, because the club coaches and the high school coaches you're going to meet in different areas are, fantastic contacts for your whole career and really, really great people. So I think going out and not being afraid to experience other places is good, especially in this business, because I don't think you always get the opportunity to go exactly where you want to go.
Yeah, for me, it was, 5 years in this profession, and then my mentor retires after 20 plus, actually 20 years with the University of Hawaii. I'm over there in limbo, like, what am I going to do next? And I got the privilege to work with John Newley for 3 years at the Wahine basketball program, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, I might have a job for you." And I'm like, "Wow, cool, that, keep me in mind." And then when he called me probably a week later to say, "Would you be interested?" I don't think he finished the sentence before I said, "When do I come?" Like, I just was all in. And that's just because I was following my heart. I didn't even take a visit to Idaho State University. It's in Pocatello, Idaho. I didn't even know where Pocatello was. I knew where Boise, Idaho was. Looked Boise up, and then I'm like, whoa, it's all the way over here. Didn't matter. I didn't even realize Salt Lake City was the closest major airport to Pocatello, Idaho. But that was kind of the unknown that I was just willing to take that risk. I loved what I was doing, and I got my foot in the door, and I just did not want to lose any opportunity at the possibility of doing this for a career. And, knock on wood, that was back in 2004. And so I know it takes a little luck, sometimes the right timing, and those opportunities, but, don't get ready when those opportunities arise. Be ready and kind of have your priorities in order to help you navigate through those decisions.
Brian, talk a little bit about that journey for you. You've mentioned it a couple times on the show, but I think that, you and Tony have that, similar coast to coast kind of thing to get yourself in that place,
Yeah. So Kathy Marpy is still my mentor, but she was the head coach at San Diego. And, she told me upon graduation, she said, "I cannot hire you until you leave and become a coach because you're too close to our players." Too close just meaning because I was a student, right? And what I didn't know is, okay, what does leave mean, right? So I went to Louisiana, got hooked up with a great staff, great mentors out there. They hooked me up to Louisiana Tech camp. So I started, there with Leon Barmore at the time, which was he's one of the great coaches. I bought a truck just before that move. And so now I'm driving back to San Diego to do summer camps with Brad Hollins on the men's side. And then Kathy Marpy's on the women's side. But then Bridget retired. And so now I'm like, okay, what's next? And, I hop on the phone with Melissa Irvin, and she's like, I didn't hear the school. I heard Williamsburg. I didn't even hear the state. I just heard Williamsburg, and I'm like, okay, I've been to Williamsburg, Virginia. It's a nice place. There, it's close to DC, this and that. Little did I know, I took the left at Knoxville and went up to Kentucky, right? And so I was there for 4 years, but then I started driving up to Yukon camp, driving all the way down the coast back to Louisiana Tech camp, and then out to San Diego. So I was doing that for 4 years. But I think the biggest thing is, like, every year, Kathy Marpy had a position open, that third, right? Like, because the third is like, you're there maybe a year or two and then you move on. But then I started something that she was like, yeah, but you can't finish your master's degree. Like, you got to keep going, so I just kept on going, and it just seemed like every move I was further away from home, because obviously I got out to Cornell, and I'm thinking, wow, okay, like, I traded in shorts for sweaters and parkas and everything else, but that's the thing. I think, Tony and Gavin alluded to this, where it's like, you just got to go, because if you really want it, you just got to go, and you got to do. And I think that's the thing that, I think young coaches, they know that, but then it's when it has to be a decision, or it's late summer and you only have the one option in Kentucky, are you hopping in your truck and are you going, So I think that's the thing that not that I learned, but it just became my story. How about you?
Right. Well, for me, like I said, I was lucky enough to end up starting my career where I played, and that got me into my journey. But it was interesting because at that time, I ended up getting married about my 6th year as head coach. And my wife, who played at the University of Idaho, said to me, she's like, okay, are you really doing this? This is like really your thing? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, well, you need to go, you need to move on. Like, you need the next thing. And so I give her a lot of credit for, the ability to then seek out. And some of that was just, once I put myself out there, that's something I was going to do, because, I was sort of in that head coach pond, right? Where it's like, oh, this guy's a head coach. Well, he probably doesn't. And so that literally took me to Cal State Bakersfield through for a season, and then on to the University of San Francisco, where basically I fell into the spot that Tony talked about at USF. And so, so my journey is head coach, assistant, part-time assistant at Bakersfield, to grad assistant at USF. And so it seems like a backwards path. So mine isn't so much of location go. Mine is being willing to take a different title on next to my name to make my journey go here. And I think that's another thing where I think sometimes we get in and we get going, and it's like, oh, well, I don't want to make a move like that because I feel like that's going to be perceived that, there's a problem or what have you. And so sometimes I think Gav may have mentioned it. Sometimes you just have to write your own story with the moves you make and the decisions you make. So, and it's something I'm so happy about, because it's part of the foundation of being around and appreciating everybody's job in this business, because of having to take the path that I took. So for me, that was the risks, I guess, was it started out easy, fell into it, right place, right time. And then it's like, well, do you really want to do this and do it really high level? You're going to have to pivot and make some different moves. So yeah, so those were probably my early decisions, interesting decisions, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, you reference pivoting, right? And I think that is why we started this show, is to have the conversations, and we're excited for our guests today. So we'll be right back, and we'll come back with joy.
Thank you, everyone, for supporting us and watching From the Bench. We appreciate you being there for us every week as we drop our episodes every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 o'clock Pacific. We appreciate all the support that we've gotten so far, and we really appreciate our guests that have been on. Hopefully you'll hit the subscribe button below and check us out on a weekly basis. But for now, let's get back to the conversation from the bench. Welcome back, everybody, to From the Bench. We have our guest with us today, assistant coach at Florida State University, Joy McCorvey. Just to give you a little intro on her, she was a standout player at St. John's, really helped that program take off under Coach Kim Barnes Arico. And now she's worked her way around the coaching world a little bit, starting at St. John's, moving on to Michigan, and then now currently at Florida State. We really appreciate you being with us, Joy. And if you could just, I kind of just glossed over your story a little bit. If you could kind of share with us your story and how you got where you are now.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I am super excited to be on. This is super exciting, and just, all the information and in every aspect that you guys are going in has been really good. So just a little bit about myself. Like you said, I played at St. John's, small town country girl, decided that I wanted to be a city girl from Alabama. Took a chance and went to school at St. John's in New York, had an unbelievable experience there. Played overseas in Germany for a year, and then had the unique opportunity, which is different, a little bit different than the normal getting into this business of coaching, a different opportunity where I started as a coach. So I played, like I said, I played overseas for a year, and then I had the opportunity to go back and be an assistant at St. John's with my head coach, Arico. So that was really, really cool. It was funny just even having the meeting. I remember our first meeting talking about it. And I said to her, I was like, do you think I could really do this? Because I went to school to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to coach high school. I wanted, that perfect life. And just that her confidence that she had in myself, just from obviously coaching me and just seeing potential that I didn't see in myself at that time. So I took the chance, gave up playing. A year later, we were at Michigan. So I went with her to Michigan for 6 years. And now I am at Florida State. This is just finished my second season at Florida State. I'm forever grateful for Kim and the opportunity that she provided for me and just allowing me to grow and helping me throughout this process. Like I said, it's definitely a different and unique experience because I didn't go the GA route, the director of ops. I went straight into coaching, and obviously it brought a lot of challenges just being young in the business and trying to grow and learn with the vets.
Joy, I think that's great. First of all, thank you for being on. You talked about, we just went around and we talked about early in our careers, those struggles and just those things, right? Like, I mean, when you get thrown into that assistant coach fire, we all have hit some kind of speed bump. So talk to us a little bit, obviously as a player, you were very successful and Kim saw something in you. So what did you struggle in early in your career that you're like, oh man, like I better learn this?
Yeah, I mean, oh man, go down the list. I think the first part is just when you're a player, you're so used to it being about you, and then really quickly you have to flip the switch of it always being about others, whether it be just your staff and what your head coach needs and wants, as well as the players, and just making sure that you're very in tune with their needs and always, putting that first. And just, I mean, it's the day-to-day of the grind that you don't know until you're in it. From a player perspective, you see it, you see the coaches on the court, they have to go recruiting, but you don't see just all of the work outside of that. I mean, as you guys know, you go home and you're still working, whether it be in season, out of season with recruiting. Obviously recruiting never ends, but you're always doing something. So that was definitely an adjustment, just the time management and just prioritizing what's most important and learning what's most important. I was very fortunate to have some really experienced and really good assistants that I was surrounded by, some who have since gone on to be head coaches. And I just tried to be a sponge. I knew I didn't know a lot of things in that moment. And I think another thing too, like when you get in and you think it's X's and O's, but there's so many other things. The head coach is going to handle the X's and O's, but there's so many other things that you have to become really good at. And you have to figure out what's your niche and how can you bring value to that program. And it's like for players as a freshman, you know, you have to figure out how you're going to contribute to that team. And it may look different than, obviously it's going to look different than when you were in high school. I think it's the same as coaching. You're surrounded by other great people on your staff, and you have to figure out and find what value you're going to bring, whether that's recruiting, whether that's player development, whether that's relationships. And I think for me, the unique part was that I had been with Kim I had played for her. So I knew who she was. I knew you know, her feels and when she needed something or when she didn't. So my first year, I really brought value in that sense to our other two assistants who hadn't been with Kim. And then just really learn from them. I mean, I remember when they're starting scouting reports, I was in my assistant coach's office every day, Coach Mel, who's now the head coach at Xavier. I'm like, okay, it's even the terminology. You play and you hear one thing, and then these coaches start talking other stuff, and you're like, what the heck is that? I don't even know what that is, you know? And then being able to explain it and being able to be a really good teacher and explain it to a group, to your players, and being able to implement in a short amount of time just a strategy for how you're going to win. So, I mean, I think I could spend an hour on just all the things that you have to learn and you have to quickly adapt to. But I think the most important thing is being a sponge and not being afraid and being vulnerable and knowing that you don't know in that moment. You know, you're trying to figure it out. And like I said, I was very fortunate to have really good assistants that took me under their wings and really tried to mentor me and help me. And it's from booking hotels, getting to the airport. I remember my first year, I was supposed to go to watch a game and I went to the wrong state. Like, could you imagine? Like, I got there and I was like, oh shoot. And it's like those attention to details, like those little things that you just have to learn. I mean, I cried for like a week. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. I was bawling, crying, having to call my head coach and say, Coach, I really screwed up. But I think owning those and then trying to learn and grow from those mistakes and not making them as much. But it's a growing process, and like anything in life. But just really trying to be a sponge and get better at every area.
So I'm going to share a story real quick, Joy, that I'm sure you're not even aware of before I get to my question. But I was visiting University of Michigan. I was in the area to see my guy, Wes Brooks, who I worked with here at Utah for a couple years. And he's giving me a tour of the facility. And, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing Joy and meeting Kim, which I never had. And I never got the chance to do so because that was the day Joy accepted the job at Florida State. So.
Do you were in Michigan?
Yes, I was walking the hallways and you guys were having your closed door conversation, which I can only imagine.
Did you even be crying?
Pretty tough. No, I know. But I think some insight to that is, you know, you were in a comfortable situation. The relationship you had with Kim was probably unbelievably close, and you probably were, you know, somebody she could go to, somebody you could go to her. And yet you were at a point in your career where you put down your guard. You said the fear of the unknown didn't deter you. You kind of had that, I guess, courage to take on maybe a new challenge. But what could you take us through that process that maybe might help the younger generation and younger coaches maybe put in this position where sometimes as an individual, because I went through it, you know, sometimes you got to spread your wings and fly and kind of learn things, how it's done elsewhere and whatnot. But if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, I for all of my playing career and most of my coaching career, I was with one person. And Kim was she still is like a second mom to me. So it was very tough. It was definitely a very tough decision, but I think first, you know, like you have to be where your feet are and you have to just continue to grow and get better. And then when that opportunity presents itself, it's kind of the first time I had that opportunity, and Kim was amazing and just helping me. And I literally went in, I'm like, what do you do? I don't even know how to handle this process. And really talked to her a lot, and she mentored me and just trying to figure out if it was the best fit for me and how you go about that process. But again, it was me just having the opportunity to spread my wings and grow, and really try to figure out who I was and starting to form my own philosophies by saying things differently. We go to seminars, you watch things online, and they're great, but having that experience somewhere else and seeing someone do it differently, Coach Sue's had tremendous success here at Florida State. It's a different conference. It's the ACC conference. So just everything from just seeing a different style, seeing different coaching philosophies, and understanding that there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Kim has been very successful. Coach Sue has been very successful. And now for me, I'm starting to form my own philosophies, of when I do become a head coach at some point. It's definitely a dream of mine. How will I want to be as a head coach? And just taking the qualities and just the styles of both, and really trying to figure out who I am. It's an ongoing process for sure. But again, it wasn't an easy decision. It's like you said, you're a bird and you're with your mom in that nest and you're safe and she's going to protect you and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, it's the uneasiness of knowing. And it's funny, I said to her, I was like, am I good enough? Like, you think I'm ready? Because I didn't know. I know that she, Kim has been very successful for a reason, and her she demands and expects a lot, as she, as any head coach that wants to be successful should. So I always said, well, I must be doing okay because we're good, we're rolling, we got it going. But and it allowed me to just grow even from a confidence standpoint. To know now 2 seasons later that I can stand on my own 2 feet. And I have grown as a woman. I've grown in just my vision as an assistant, as a future aspiring head coach. So it's been great. I'm closer to home, which is obviously going to New York and then jumping right into the coaching world. I haven't been back this close to home since high school. So it's allowed me to even have that aspect of my life of having my family be at games, watching my little nephew grow up, and having a kind of personal dog sitter now with my parents. I'm like, okay, take my dog, thanks. So, it's been an unbelievable experience, but it was the fear. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of who you really are as a person, not having that quote unquote safety net. But it's been awesome, and it's why we do it. It's why we continue to grow, and it's what we tell our players all the time.
So good, Joy. That what you just said right there, I think is the drive that all of us have been in this for such a long time. I know the first time I probably interacted with you on any deep level was when we were in Puerto Rico together. I think both our teams were playing in the tournament there, and it was just fun. I knew Megan a little bit, and so it was just fun to get to know you and Mel even on a deeper level, and it's just been fun to follow your journey and path. So as Brian said, it's just appreciate you having the time to come on with us. You really kind of touched on so many things. Talk more. You mentioned finding your niche a little bit. How did you find that? I know you mentioned it twice now, that in 2 different scenarios, first when you're starting out, then when you're making a decision to leave the nest, that Coach Kim really infused you with confidence. But then maybe talk about, was that somewhat finding your own niche? And then how did you go about doing that? And how has it differed maybe from program to program? Even though you were with the same head coach when you transitioned from St. John's to Michigan, was your niche different? And then now going to work for Sue, how has that changed? Or if it has, and maybe so that way we can just get a better understanding of the importance of that. I think sometimes people get in and they kind of don't have an identity, and it's like, well, what is that person about? And I've always seen that in you in our conversations, recruiting, or just, at that tournament, just this young woman knows where she's going to be in 5 years. But you mentioned there was moments of apprehension that don't always necessarily we see, when we're just having a conversation. I appreciate you just being honest about that, but maybe just talk us through that path a little bit.
Yeah. I think obviously recruiting, you have to, first and foremost, you have to find your niche in that. And that looks different for every person. I'm a very relational person. So for me, it was really trying to be intentional about the relationships I was building with coaches within the business, but also just high school coaches, AAU coaches, and then trying to, through talking through other people, trying to figure out, okay, where am I, like, where can I be most successful with recruiting? You can go and recruit any kid. You can try to recruit any kid. But ultimately there are places and there are, just after time building relationships where whether it be from a logistical standpoint or just, just the relationships where you may or may not have more success. So it's funny, like even one of my former assistants said to me one day, he said, how many calls you make before you get to work? And I was like, I like to listen to my music in the morning. And he was like, well, let me tell you something. If you want to like be super successful in this business and really form those relationships, try to make 4 or 5 before you get to work. And then, they may not answer right then, but now you've at least started to, you've made 4 phone calls. Now you get to work and you get busy, but that didn't go by the wayside. And then on the way home, like make 4 or 5 more. And I have since taken that advice and I have run with it. And I think it was so important to prioritizing my time and also really, really building, like you can't build a relationship with one conversation, and it can't always be about basketball and it can't always be about recruiting. You have to really get to know people for who they are outside of basketball. And then that's when you really get to the meat and potatoes of if you really think that you have a shot with the kid or who's surrounded by the kid. So I think first and foremost, it's got to be recruiting. And for me, it's just being on the phones, like I said, being intentional in my relationships. And it's worked. Obviously it's different for everyone. I think the other thing for me is just my pulse and my feel and my relationships with the players. And that has really worked for me. I'm very intentional in that. And I feel like I can relate, and I, especially being younger, a couple of years back, because we like the same things at that time. So I could really relate to the things that were going on in their world outside of basketball, but also still kind of have that thick shell of being able to coach them and them have that respect for me. And that was tough early on because I was so young. Now it's still very similar, just in recruiting and even with our own players, of really getting to know them. And I think that's definitely been one of my niches, of just really getting to know our players outside of the court. And it's helped just with coaching. It's helped in recruiting. I think for me, those would be my 2. And obviously the basketball stuff takes care of itself. It's just continuing to study and learn from others and learn from people in your conference and just watching tons of games. But those for me were the 2 that have really helped me in my career.
Well, you've done a great job, obviously, with recruiting. I mean, and it's pretty much well known wherever you've been able to help bring really good players in, and building those relationships with players are huge. I think that's a big thing today. It's why, kids transfer, and, there's just not enough real solid intentional relationships that are out there.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you, we've talked on this show a little bit about, because we're all maybe a generation ahead of you as far as coaching goes. So we've talked about kind of the jobs that you start with. You get your first job, and like I said, for me, I was a master's student and I was an actual coach. So I was going to school, I was trying to coach, and the first thing they put in front of us back then was VHS tapes and the film exchange and figuring out sending FedEx and all this crazy business. Now I think when you started, that was probably bye-bye. I don't think you've even seen a VHS tape in your life, but maybe if you can give me what you would describe for younger coaches out there just starting, what would be an equivalent job today, maybe that was like our film exchange 20 years ago?
Great question, Tony. An equivalent job. I think it always goes back to recruiting. I think also too, on that note though, yes, it was very different from just the experience then to now. But I think that the grind and the attention to details and the preparation is still the same. I think now obviously it's more time efficient. You can, pull it off synergy. You don't have to hit pause, rewind, like zoom in on players. You can go watch 40 clips of players if you want to, when you're talking about personnel. But I think the grunt work and the tedious time that's spent on making sure that your scout or just player development is at the highest level is still the same. Now, I'm speaking, I didn't do those things, but
well,
I didn't have to
what I'm trying to get at is more like what's something right now that if you were somebody who's just starting, like and they're just getting their first taste of what it is to be a coach or even a GA or anything at the, just starting out, what's kind of like the labor intensive job now that that those starters out need to be comfortable doing?
I think it's recruiting. I think it's going to, if you go to a place, it's not just you're going to one school, you're trying to hit, if it's 10 schools in that area and you can hit 8 of them, go hit 8 of them, and those people those coaches may not necessarily have a kid at your caliber place at the moment, but you never know. And they may see other kids and then call you about other kids. So I think to me, that would be the equivalence of not just you're going on home. Like if you're going on a home visit and you're in, say, Atlanta, don't just go on one home visit to Atlanta. There's so many other places that you can hit and so many other coaches, whether it be AAU or high school coaches, that you can connect with in a day's time, really maximizing the day. To me, I think that would be the equivalence of it, because there's just so many other things that you can do in a day's time. And you can literally, if you want to, see 8 to 10 people in a day. Now you're going to start early in the morning, you're going to get up and start early in the morning, and you may not finish to 9 p.m., but the connections that you've made in that day's time are huge and pay tremendous dividends down the stretch. So for me, I think that would be the equivalent. Because again, that's the time, that's the tedious, that's what you have to do. And it's spending an hour going to get a coffee, going to have lunch, I've gone to 3 lunches one day. I was stuffed. But hey, if I can meet with you at 12:30 and now you can meet with me at 1:15 and now you can meet with me at 2:00, I'll just have a little piece of toast here and a little, some chips or something here, and we're going to figure it out. But if, when coaches want to make time and you make time to spend time with them, to me, especially face-to-face, that's more valuable than anything you can do on the phone. So I would say that would be the equivalent. Would you guys agree or no?
I would say that that's a huge one, and obviously if you're walking into a coaching role, obviously if you're walking into a different role, then there's probably other things that you're going to be more inclined to have to grind through.
Yeah.
I would agree 100% that the more time you can build making relationships and creating good relationships with people, the better chance you are down the line to have some of those coaches reach out to you when they have a kid or a transfer or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that goes with that, Joy, and I know I've seen you do this many, many years now, is that, you might not have a game on your schedule at a big event, but there's plenty of games that are going on, so that there's, you go and you can go watch, some 8th graders, that maybe, you might not have seen. But there's always something to watch when you go to events that, and that's just showing how much work and effort you want to put in. And like you said, I wrote a big note here that said, be efficient with your time. Use it if you're going to be there and you're going to be using it, use it all and be efficient with it. So I think that's a great lesson going forward.
And I totally agree with that. I think that's the thing, right? You got to define your grind and then it's got to be cultivated a little bit so that those relationships are strong. I'm going to stay on this little topic, but I'm going to pivot just a little bit, maybe put you on the spot, which, that's what we like to do. So at your stage in your career, in terms of my career, I had just gotten to Loyola Marymount, just got under the umbrella of Julie Wilhoit and Lynn Flanagan, and I learned so much. But what they allowed me to do is kind of elevate myself to start thinking about more. And it's not so much more responsibilities, more, tasks, but think more about like, what are you going to do when you are the head coach? Not that I was ready to be a head coach, but like starting to think. So I'd like you to kind of talk about, as you were coming in, what skill sets were you really focused on? And then now, and Sue, don't worry, she's not running, right? But like,
don't worry.
Head coach, when you do become a head coach, like when you're at those games, when you're at the, when you're sitting on and you're like, I have a game off, but I'm still going to sit here, and you're watching all these coaches and watching all the assistants. What skill sets are you picking up? And not so much for your staff, future staff, but like, what are you picking out? Like, okay, that coach has it.
Wow, that's a good question. That is putting me on the spot. Okay. I would 100% agree. And, just in my growth, the last 2 seasons, Sue has really challenged me to think bigger picture, and think just start to think as a head coach, because there's so many different things from a head coaching perspective that you have to deal with, besides just the practice and the recruiting. And obviously those are 2 big things. But there's so many other roles, so many other directions that she's pulled in. And she does a tremendous job of just really giving us a more hands-on approach, and really having us involved in those day-to-day decisions that she has to make. It's funny, we were chatting last week just about where now in year 2, where I need to continue to grow, and when she said it, I'm like, I want to grow in everything. She's like, no, you want to grow in everything, but you've got to really pinpoint things. For example, doing things like this. For me, just talking in different functions, whether it be a booster event or just getting out in the community more. And Sue's phenomenal at things like that. So I'm learning from that perspective, because that's a big part of just in the next realm of being a head coach. And then watching others, it's one thing to be in the gym. It's another thing to be paying attention. So are they really paying attention, or are they just chatty patties? And not saying that you can't talk and you can't socialize, because obviously that's where we build relationships within this coaching community. That's where you start to form those relationships. And it's nice to see your friends when you are out and about, but really just, are they being intentional? Are they just kind of wandering around? Or I tend to think that I'm always on a mission. And I think sometimes it comes across as probably like if I'm like on a mission, I literally may not have seen you. And then people are like, well, you didn't speak to me. I'm like, I don't even know where you were. I knew I was going to court 7. I was ready to go to court 7. Where's my seat? Can I sit between 7 and 8? And then who's on 9? Do I need to walk over to 9? Like, just watching people really have a plan. And I think Tony alluded to this earlier, of just, if you have a break for 3 hours, that doesn't mean go sit in your car, go back to the hotel, or go for a 3-hour lunch. That means like, okay, now there's a great opportunity for me to really walk around and see other things, and find some diamond in the roughs. Or if there's a Florida team and I don't really know that coach, and I need to go, and so I can call that coach later on and say, hey, just love watching your team play, and again, continuing to cultivate those relationships. So yeah, for me, I watched even coaches that I am inspired by. I watch their mannerisms and how they are when they're out and about, because I want to be those coaches. I want to be those assistants that you see that move on to be head coaches, and then just head coaches. I've always admired Coach Sue from afar, and just watching her, as well as different other head coaches. But for me, I think on the road, that would be my thing. Like, are you paying attention? And do you know what's really going on? And not just, socializing all the time. And then again, like I said, just that's definitely one of my challenges now, just trying to really expand my thought process and really seeing bigger picture and how to manage all of that. I say that to Sue all the time, like, how do you manage all of the things that are under her umbrella, on top of making sure she's the CEO of her staff and her team and keeping our culture as intact as it is, along with managing just our staff's personality and making sure, I mean, we're humans, you know, we're all humans. So making sure that we are feeling good in whatever role that is, from her assistants down to our GAs. So for me, I think those would be the things I would look for. That's a great question, because we just talked about that, and I didn't have that many answers for her either until she started to really challenge me in thinking about those things. I'm like, yeah, okay, that is something I want to get better at. So she was so excited when I told her I was doing this. She was like, are you doing it? I was like, yes, Sue, I'm doing it. Because it's something that you have to, the only way you get better at things is if you put yourself out there. So having these conversations with you guys, obviously listening to other conversations, all of these different things that are going on, the coaching clinics and the different seminars, just really trying to grow and learn from listening to other head coaches, and just their philosophies and how they go about their day-to-day lives and cultivating their culture as well as their staff. Did that answer your question?
No, it
threw a curveball at me.
No, but I think that's those are the things you go through in a career, right? Like you're on this climb and you're just trying to get as many skill sets in your toolbox as you can, and then all of a sudden you get to a staff and now you're challenged, you know, to think just differently. And I think that's great. I mean, that's why it resonated with me, you know, this move and the role that you're in now and just what you're trying to do. And I think it's huge to pass that on to the next generation, just so that they have something to look forward to, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's been awesome for me just watching two of my former assistants who have now become head coaches in their, you know, first or second years. And I mean, I'm like, okay, so what's the biggest lesson, or how do you handle this, or how are you handling this? Because again, as people always say, it's easy 3 seats down, but when you have to ultimately make those decisions. And I think Sue even challenges, like if she's like, okay, own it, make the decision, and no matter what, this is what we're going with. And you're like, okay. It's easy to blurt it out, but when you have to own that decision, good or bad, whatever happens from it, it definitely puts a little bit more pressure on you. And I think she allows us, and that's why her coaching tree is, you know, it just continues to blossom. And obviously she has some really great head coaches that have come under her in the business, because she does allow you that ownership. And she allows you that space to really make decisions, and she trusts you with them. And you have to really think through. We always talk about just obviously not making rational decisions, but really taking the time to think through things. Don't be just a blurter outer. Really come in and be very intentional and rational with whatever decision or whatever decision she's allowed you to make, whether it be on the court, or just in administration, day-to-day things off the court.
Jesse, you have a follow-up? I was going to say, you have a follow-up before I take it in a different direction?
No, I do. I will follow up with something that you brought up a little bit earlier, Joy, and maybe you can speak on, again, putting you on the spot. You can go where you want to go with this, but you talked about some opportunities where you mentioned, hey, being developed yourself as a strong woman role model to your players, and that relation there. And it's funny that you use those words, because I was sharing a little bit last night with a friend who was coming on, and she jumped on to the website and literally, and I'm going to read the quote, and then Brian, you can tweet it out later. But basically, literally, this is just off of reading about you, was she looks like a strong, independent, no bullshit woman. And, you know, and so, you know, I just think that you mentioned that sort of as something that's important to you, because you dropped it earlier, but you talk a little bit, you had this idea of where I was going to be this perfect life, high school coach, teach kids, and then someone came at me with a little bit of a curveball. What maybe before even all that is a scenario or a situation or somebody in your life that cemented that foundation for you? We talked earlier about our own sort of foundational things, but maybe what was that moment, or who was that person that maybe even before that you sort of have just, you lean on, like, no matter what, right? Like, just stormy day, you can lean on that. And it's maybe pre that time where someone said, yes, Joy, you can do this job as a college coach.
I would say first would be my mom, because she is very outspoken and she's very assertive and affirmative in whatever she believes in. She was a high school teacher, special education teacher for 20 plus years. And she just has that, she's always had that just charisma and confidence about herself. Even in handling situations with administration or just her principal or whoever, she's always just had that confidence. So growing up, I wanted that confidence. I wanted, like, and again, if you're educated and you know what you're talking about and you've done your research on whatever that is, you can have that. So I always wanted to be, like her as a mom, as a wife, and obviously in the workforce. I think it carried over to college. I was a 4-year captain. So I had to grow up pretty quickly in that sense, just coming in as a freshman and naturally having kind of that leadership style, and not being afraid to voice my opinions in the right way, knowing that I was going to be one of the hardest workers. That would never have to be questioned. And I think I get a lot of that from my mom and my dad in terms of work ethic. They were blue collar, they worked to provide, whatever we needed as children. And that's what I saw day in and day out. So I definitely started with her. It's funny now, we kind of butt heads sometimes because now we're very similar. And it's the things you're like, oh, my mom, but it's who I've become. And I'm very proud of that, because I got to watch her, and still do just be so enthused with confidence, and no matter what she's doing, and just wrap herself in the community, in church, and again, being a wife, being a mom, and then going to St. John's and watching Kim, and I know you guys all know Kim, like she has that same like swag, like she's shoulders back. It's funny, we have this thing that we used to talk about at Michigan, but we still talk about it, just, powerful, sorry guys, but it's like Powerful Women's Club, but like, what does that look like when you're being role models for these young women? Like, how do you show them that they have that platform to speak on things that concern them or things that interest them, or just how are they going to change the world? And so we always say, shoulders back, walk with swag. And she really helped me and molded me into that, and just being unapologetic about it. And then now I get to watch Sue, and she has that. I mean, Sue can take the room. It doesn't matter what room she walks in, she can take over the room with just her personality and her charisma. And she's just such a good person to be around. I literally don't think I met anyone in Tallahassee who doesn't know Sue, or love Sue. So I think for me, it's been those three that have really helped. And like I said, especially my mom, and then going to Kim. And I used to say to her, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so like my mom. But just having that like confidence and that demand to be great. And again, being unapologetic about it. So I would say that it would be those people for sure.
That's great.
Okay, now as I pivot into a different direction and kind of wrap it up before I turn it back over to Tony. But for those young aspiring coaches, Joy, I think the things that I've written down that are key to being a successful coach at any level, in collegiate athletics is, professionalism. You check that box. You're very intentional with your time and your tasks. Check that box. And then you said it earlier, attention to detail. Like those three things are huge. And Joy, that's part of your DNA of being where you are right now and the success level that you have had. I do want to, before I turn it over, I do want to touch on just the work-life balance. We've all had our grinds. We've all And I'm not talking about food grind, not that kind of grind, but we've all
I'm on the food grind.
yeah, right. We've all gone through that. Each one of us a little different. But with that, I've had the great opportunity, and I'm thankful to work for bosses that have had good work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
So just speak on some of the things that maybe away from basketball, however small that time may be, what kind of gets you through the day? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do to sometimes just have to unplug? Because I think balance is very important, because the other B word that comes into mind is burnout. And we all got to be very cautious of that.
Similar to you, Gavin, I've worked for coaches that really value that, whether it be just spending time with your family or just getting away and finding what you like to do. So I love working out. So whether it be in the morning or even going out of season, for lunch, before lunch, like going to work out, or late night, my balance is working out. I have a dog. So I'm a dog mom. And obviously dogs aren't kids, but they, goodness gracious, just the things you have to do and the things you have to worry about and pre-plan in this crazy life, especially during the season. So I love going on walks with my dog. I love just the time the cuddles on the couch when I'm watching film with her. And reading. I've tried to do more reading and just my growing and really taking advantage of this time. I have goals in the season. I'm like, okay, a book a month, like I have to do it. But what does that look like? And really you have to plan it out. Like I am definitely a planner. I want to write it down. I want to check it off. I want to highlight it, cross it out. So I have to write it down, read 2 chapters tonight in this book, or you have to your schedule is going to be crazy. You got to work out Monday and Tuesday, and then maybe down the back end on Saturday. But yeah, it's very important. It is very important because you need, for me, that hour that I'm working out, you just go somewhere else. I put my watch on Do Not Disturb, because, calls keep coming in, and then you're immediately back to I've left. I go to Orange Theory, and I've left Orange Theory because I get calls. I'm like, oh my gosh, it could have waited 30 minutes though. So I go Do Not Disturb, stay in this hour, stay in this moment, and really just, I've watched a lot of people talk about this, and I think now being older, I try to do this every day, of just those grateful moments and grateful walks that you have, whether it be getting dressed in the morning, or when, for me, it's working out. When I'm dead tired, I go immediately to what am I grateful for today? What am I grateful for this week? We've all been so blessed in our lives to be able to be in the positions that we're in. So really just reflecting on those little moments that are really big moments in the big scheme of things. And I think lately, in the last year or so, I've been trying to just reflect and meditate more. I think it's so important. I love yoga, but if I'm not doing yoga, can I just sit for 3 minutes and just really focus on my breath and really reflect and really meditate on what I want this week to look like, what I want it to look like from a working standpoint, and just the goals that I have set for that week, but then also from a personal standpoint. So it's a kind of a combination, a lot of working out. That's where I have the most success. But then just really being still. And Sue has really challenged me with this, because she is such a thinker, and she needs those moments where she can be still and really figure out what, God is telling her, and what's, about everything. And I really have tried to put myself in those moments, and for small moments at a time. Hopefully, as my reflection and my meditation continues, I can go longer without being distracted. And then my faith, just really being, it gets crazy in our season, but those are things that I can't waver from. And just making sure, we play on Sundays, but then I'm going to Bible study. I'm not, or online church. Now this is all you can do. But really making sure that I'm not letting the week go by without making sure I'm doing something, whether it be Bible study or just reading chapters or listening to different podcasts or different sermons with my faith. I think that's very important, and it keeps me very balanced. And being here in Florida, it's given me a different perspective because, like I said earlier, I am closer to my family. So they've given me a different balance, where when I was in Michigan, I would go home and I could be mad at the world because we lost a game, or, you know, obviously in recruiting, you get some, you don't. And as a competitor, you're upset, you know, and you're trying to figure out where did you go wrong, you know, and you all night just can't sleep thinking about those things. Or losing a game. It's really put into perspective for me. As much as it is a big deal, the bigger and most important things are having my family there. And like I said, being able to, when I come home, they're here and they just want to like figure out what's going on, you know? And my mom has since learned, now being closer, we're not talking about the game. This is something that she's had to learn, because now she's like in the house. So she's like, well, what happened? I'm like, no. No, we're not talking about it. I still need my 24 hours, but I'm going to be present in this moment of being with you guys, you know? And they've learned too, around midnight, I'm like, all right, I'm cracking out my computer, and my mom will put on a show and she'll stay up. And I love that time because she understands it. And I still get to do my work, but then I've also taken time to spend an hour or two with them and just talk about their lives. I think we get so caught in our lives, we forget that our family and friends have lives, and we need to, as much as they invest in us, we need to invest in them as well. And really be in tune to what's going on in their lives. It's a different world, but because of them is why we are where we are. So yeah, those would be my things: my faith, working out, a little meditation, yoga, and really, especially now, this COVID-19 has just really taught me how much you still have to do those things. When we go back to our normal, the new normal lives, we still have to take time, and you will have time, but take that time to really invest in the people that have invested in you from, you know, your childhood on, whether it be high school friends, college friends, coaches in the business. Just really investing and continuing to make sure you're checking on them. I definitely do a lot more of that now.
All right, one last thing I wanted to fire off. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. You're only allowed to give me one word as an answer. A little rapid fire at the end, all right?
Bring it.
All right, we were talking about balance, so you talk about your exercise. What's your favorite mode of exercise?
Treadmill. At the highest speed it can go.
I said one word.
Oh, sorry, treadmill. See my competitive side? I'm already like, oh, highest speed.
No, I absolutely love it. All right, your favorite basketball player?
Lisa Leslie.
Okay, very nice. Favorite snack on the road recruiting?
Can I give two?
Sure, why not? We're charitable.
We have dirty, but it's so good. Spicy nacho Doritos and the grandma blue pack cookies. The combo of the sweet and salty, amazing.
Okay, okay. The best Final Four city?
Nashville.
Okay. And then the very last one, which is probably the most important one. In one word, what's the most important quality for a young coach starting out? One word.
One word. I don't like to use the word grinder because, like, what does that mean? A go-getter. Go-getter.
Okay. That'll work.
Go-getter, for sure.
Joy, thank you so much for being with us this week. Everybody, Joy McCorvey, great person and wonderful recruiter, coach, mentor, friend, just a wonderful all-around person. Thank you so much for being with us this week From the Bench.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome. Thank you.
Welcome back to From the Bench. We want to thank again Joy for having come on and given her story and some insight to her success as a Division I basketball coach. Now we're going to kick it around to the guys. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I thought Joy put out some really good things. I mean, she, talking about being thoughtful and being, dedicated to your craft, but also not fanatical about your craft. Be dedicated, be intentional about what you're doing, communicating, talking with people, being genuine in that regard. And also being aware that there's, another side where you need to, step away sometimes, meditate, relax, turn your phone off, just have some balance in your life. But again, a young coach who went from playing to coach, been extremely successful, but has a very good and balanced and grounded plan. And I think she's a great coach to emulate if you're young and trying to, build your role and build your niche in the business.
Brian, Gavin, before I go, did you want to throw your wrap up, what you thought as well, and then I'll follow up with you?
Sure. The one word that really comes to mind through hearing a lot of her experiences and stories is just being intentional with her time. She talked about, driving to work, making a few phone calls, driving home, making a few phone calls. If she's in a gym, being intentional with going to see this coach, maybe from her state that she hasn't seen. Those are all just calculated decisions that are going to lead to better things down the road. It might not be right then and there, but she's intentional with her time and intentional with the direction she's going. And then that's what lays the foundation to her success, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's so key. The thing that stood out for me, and I think that really our mission with this show was that ability to share and help, and that was the thing that came out to me. That was like with, she didn't dodge anything we asked her. She was willing to share, be vulnerable, be specific about some tips that have helped her and some things that she's found that have worked. She talks about a major mistake and it was okay. She was like, I live to fight another day. But, sometimes I think we forget that sometimes we have to take a risk. At the beginning of the show, we talked about some of the risks we took professionally. And she shared that with us in a microcosm with, hey, I went to the wrong state, and then I'm taking a risk to get outside of my comfort zone. I think sometimes we find people they get in that comfort space and they're not willing to do that. So that was some things that stood out for me that she was willing to share with us that I think are really, really transcendent into what can really be helpful. And that was, I thought, really, really fun. I mean, I took a bunch of notes, just things that she dropped that I know I'm going to be a little bit better at. So I think she's great, and I think everybody's going to pick out one or two things that really resonate for them. B, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's so many coaches out there, right? Like there's a lot of us, and I think she is proving why she is becoming that next generation. The way she does things, her balance, the type, she put it on the tag, right? Like, here's how I grind. Here's what it looks like. And so I would challenge, and this is what we talked about, I would challenge younger coaches or just coaches in general, go watch it in person, because it is overwhelming when you walk into these multi-court facilities, how many games are going on, how many coaches are there, how many players, but to be able to manage, 2 courts at a time and then go peek at the third, and the why though. Why? Because she wants to develop relationships with those coaches and eventually find those players that fit Florida State, right? Like that's the end goal. But I think, like, I've just been so impressed with just, her generation's grind, her generation's why, her generation's even mentors, and things like that. And she's impressive, and I think it's why, we're lucky to have her on. And I think we're lucky to have her share her story. I mean, we've said it multiple times. I think that's the thing. Like, your story is going to be unique. And as long as you know your story, you trust it, start telling it, because there's someone out there that will be inspired, whether they are 12 years older, or not. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the conversations that we're having. So again, we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We are very humbled with your support and continued support with listening to us tell our story, but tell the stories of others. Until next week from the bench, we will see you. Thank you.